I really think that the Catholic Church is a pagan church that's just looking like a Christian church. For instance, in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 8 and verse 16, the prophet was sent to the temple, and he saw all the priests there, their back towards the altar, but they were facing the sun in the east. So why is it that the Catholic priest takes the bread, which is round, look like a disc representing the sun, and he faces the east with that? And also, we see all the statues that you have, what you would think is a halo behind the head. It's more sunburst behind the head of those idols right there.
Hey, can I ask a clarifying question? Do you think that there was when do you think this happened, that, the true church was replaced with this sun worship cult?
Well, I think it has always been that way, because, you took the Sabbath and you said, okay, Sunday, which is to be the day you worship the sun, and that's now a day of obligation in the Catholic Church, as opposed to the Holy Sabbath day, the seventh day of God.
I wondered, okay, so it sounds like you're maybe coming from an Adventist background. Really interesting. So, Ellen Goldwhite, I assume you're familiar with her kind of claims about this, right?
I am,
she claims that this...
I'm talking strictly Bible.
Okay,
yeah,
okay, sure. So I mentioned the historical part just because the Christians are worshiping on Sunday in the first century. So if your claims were right, we would have to say that during the time of the apostles, Christianity was replaced with a sun-worshiping cult, and nobody knew it, and the apostles didn't stop it. And if that were true, I wouldn't trust the apostles. It wouldn't become Adventist. I would just give up on Christianity and say, well, how could we trust this? So I just bring that up to say what sounds like an argument against Catholicism specifically is really an argument against Christianity as a whole. So to get into this particulars, in terms of Ezekiel 8, the problem with them was not that they were facing east. The problem is that they were worshiping the sun and turning their backs to the Holy of Holies. Now, the Holy of Holies, the fulfillment of that is what? It's Jesus Christ. That Jesus Christ is the one who was already present in a form in the Shekinah glory, right? So Jesus is the one who was the proper center of temple worship. Do we agree on that part?
I agree on that, yeah.
Okay. So in John chapter 6, Jesus promises that he will give his true flesh and true blood to eat and drink. Now, he repeatedly reaffirms that he means this literally. He says in verse 55, my flesh is food indeed, my blood is drink indeed. He says in verse 56, he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. In verse 57, he says, as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who eats me will live because of me. In verse 58, he said, this is the bread which came down from heaven, not such as the fathers ate and died. He who eats this bread will live forever. So repeatedly, he's driving home the centrality and the reality that the core of Christian worship is to be centered around his body and blood. The worship and even the consumption of his body and blood, the communion with his body and blood. Now, go back to Malachi chapter 1, verse 11. There's a prophecy that in the days of the new covenant, the pure sacrifice will be offered all around the world. That rather than just having the temple in Jerusalem, where you have the Holy of Holies, that all around the world, people will be able to offer this true sacrifice. Well, what is that true sacrifice? The true sacrifice is what we would call the sacrifice of the Mass, that we present the body and blood of Jesus to the Father, and then we receive him as the sacrificial meal, just as the Jews of old ate the manna and ate the Passover. And in the Passover, this was a sacrificial participation. All of that is being fulfilled. So the reason the host looks like that is it's calling our mind back to the manna, not to the sun. Sure, it's round. It looks vaguely like the sun. So do a lot of things. So does a Frisbee. But that doesn't mean that it's sun worship. Rather, it reminds us of the manna. Remember, he said that he is the living bread come down from heaven. That's a reference to the manna in the Old Testament. So it looks like bread, it looks like manna, and it truly is, we believe, the body and blood of Jesus Christ in the center of Christian worship. And the last thing I'd say on this is again, this is what Christians believed from the earliest days. St. Ignatius, one of the students of the Apostle John, explained that we couldn't be in communion with the Gnostics because they don't confess the Eucharist as the true body and blood of Jesus. They weren't considered Christians because they didn't have this Eucharistic theology right. So the two possibilities then are either Christianity had already become pagan by the time of the apostles, and the apostles just went along with this transition into paganism, or that this bit about the real presence, this Eucharistic realism, is true, and that therefore these attacks, Ezekiel 8 is being taken wildly out of context and was never meant to be attacking the Catholic Mass or anything like that.